Starr King School for the Ministry, one of two Unitarian Universalist seminaries in the world, has long had a mission of educating to counter oppression and build just and sustainable communities. When I first started there 20 years ago, it was still a new thing for most people to look at their own privilege as part of understanding larger systems of oppression. It was difficult for some of us, including me, to understand that we have unearned privileges based on personal characteristics outside of our own control. The way I looked at it then, and the way I still look at it now, is that in this country, it's easier to be white than black. It's easier to be male than female. It's easier to be Christian than Jewish or Muslim or anything else for that matter. It's easier to be straight and cisgender than any flavor of queer. And obviously, it's easier to be rich than poor. And those are all privileges. Our privilege makes us complicit to varying degrees in systems of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, and on and on and on. Think about any personal or social marker, and there's a hegemonic group, the powerful, often majority group on which everything is centered. And then there's non-hegemonic groups, the others, whose experiences are rarely considered by the dominant group, especially in democracies like this, where majorities and money win. The thing is that most people don't fit into every single hegemonic category or non-hegemonic category, right? I mean, look at me. I'm in some hegemonic categories, like I'm male, I'm of European Christian descent, I'm educated and middle class. But in some areas, I'm not hegemonic. I'm not in one of those hegemonic categories. I'm queer, I'm from an immigrant family, and I'm short, which, believe me, is real. In the parlance of Starr King School in those days, sometimes I'm the bug, and sometimes I'm the windshield. Sometimes I'm getting splattered, figuratively of course, by the masses that are moving at high speed, unable to see the protective screen in front of them, largely oblivious to the carnage they're creating on their journey. And sometimes I'm the windshield, doing all of the splattering, often oblivious, sometimes feeling guilty. So as a queer person, I'm the bug. As a white person, I'm the windshield. Now, if you look at it in competitive terms, sometimes I'm the loser, sometimes I'm the winner. Someone recently gave me a pair of corresponding side-by-side lists, the characteristics of a victim compared to the characteristics of a victor. And it was a long list, but a few of the items read like this. Victims feel taken advantage of. Victors feel valid. Victims are detached, but victors are personally invested. Victims blame others. Victors are accountable. Victims procrastinate, but victors dive into tasks. Victims are self-centered. Victors are other-oriented. Try as I might, I couldn't find the source of this list, but honestly, I kind of gave up because the more I looked at the list, the less it rang true for me. I mean, victor just feels like a false duality. There are people who derive authority and even value from their identity as a victim. And there are people who see themselves as victors because everything goes their way, and so they are completely self-absorbed and completely oblivious to the suffering of others. And there's a whole lot in between. So whether you're a victim or a victor is really all a matter of perception. And maybe that whole bug windshield paradigm that we used in seminary is just as false. So what's the value in thinking within the bug windshield victim victor duality? Most of us have a choice about how we perceive ourselves. TED lecturer and teacher Sarah Hernholm tours the country talking about the victor-victim duality and offers up 3 things to remember when we're feeling defeated. Everything, she says, is happening for you, not to you. You can turn every obstacle, she says, into an opportunity. And she gives an example from her own life. When she was laid off for the 4th time from a teaching job because of budget cuts, she saw it as an opportunity to start a business called WIT, an acronym for whatever it takes. She works with tweens and teens to start their own enterprises. Cool. Now, she also suggested asking, why not me? When things go wrong, it's really easy to wallow in self-pity, to be the victim and ask the age-old question, why me? Why do bad things happen to me? The victor, she says, asks, why not me? Other people have turned lemons into lemonade. Why can't I do that? I can do that. It's okay. That's cool too. And finally, Sarah Hernholm suggests that when faced with challenges, you should ask yourself, how would I respond if I knew everything was going to be okay? Not perfect, but okay. Instead of focusing on the possibility that the worst could happen, just keep functioning like everything is going to work out. Focus on okay. And I would sum that up as, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So in summary, she says to ask, the 3 things she suggests are, everything happens for you, ask why not me, and act as if everything will be okay. In other words, you can choose to see yourself as a victor instead of a victim. So just do it. Now, as I look around this room, I would guess that most of us have a choice most of the time about how we perceive ourselves. By that I mean, in some circumstances, we feel like victims, and in other circumstances, we feel like victors. But most of the time, most of us just feel neutral, so we can choose to label ourselves victim or victor, bug or windshield. We have that choice. But let's face it, there are times when we simply don't have a choice about how we want to identify. If you're pregnant and seeking an abortion to save your own life, and you live in a state where that is now illegal, you don't get to choose to feel like a victor. If you are a transgender person in most states right now, with hundreds of laws being passed to deny the validity of your existence, you don't get to choose to feel like a victor. If you're black in this country, especially when you are surrounded by white people with all of their microaggressions and willful ignorance, you don't get to choose to feel like a victor. If some of your people have been attacked by terrorists because of your identity and others are being held hostage, if you are in a war-torn region where non-combatants are killed and starved, if you are in a democracy being dismantled by an elected power monger seeking to build a theocracy, if your rights to exist are being taken away by legislatures and courts, if relocating to a better place is simply not an option because, let's face it, there is no better place, you don't get to choose to feel like a victor. I guess the value in dual thinking about power is that it can help us recognize the situations when we have the power and choose to use that power to counter oppression and build just and sustainable communities. Ultimately, how my power gets used or abused is the result of how I see my role, my identity in any situation. At one end of each duality is a goal, and at the other end of the duality is a cautionary tale to try to avoid. I don't want to be the windshield blindly splattering everything in my path. So I can see myself as the bug and continue to be splattered. Or I can see myself as a bug joining with millions of other bugs to create a wall that diverts that windshield. A big, solid wall of bugs may not stop an oncoming vehicle, but it could cause a diversion that saves all of our lives. Being the bug doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't even have to mean being a victim. And what's so bad about victimhood if it can be harnessed into a new kind of power? So dualities serve the purpose of marking the extremes so that we can see everything in between. We need the ugly and the beautiful to find the perfectly serviceable in between. The serviceable that can make things better, even when it's scary and dangerous. And everything in between is good enough, as long as we all stick together, welcoming the newcomer as victim, victor, and everything in between. Since some of us can't rise to sing, let's remain seated for our closing song. Number